Welcome to another episode of the Balanced Growth Show. I'm your host, Dr. Travis Perry. Today we have Mr. Michael Zwick. Michael is an attorney turned private investigator who specializes in finding missing heirs and inheritance assets. He's the co-founder of Assets International, which has united heirs worldwide with over $200 million. Michael, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you, Travis. Great to be here.
Yes. How did you get into this business? Like, catch us up. Tell us your story. Why were you fascinated in finding missing assets that your clients had? Yeah, catch us up on all this.
So, very briefly, I'll try to make it as brief as possible. I was practicing law. I started a big firm. Fortunately, got laid off. Started my own practice, and was a one-man operation for a few years. And a friend and I started a little side business, uniting people with money coming to them from government treasuries. He'd experienced where his wife had been a nurse, and one of her patients had left her some money, but she wasn't able to. Uh, you know, she hadn't kept in touch with the guy, so it took a few years for the attorney to track her down. That guy was like, "Hey, this got to be a common situation." So we started a little side business, and that side business grew to the point that made it a full-time thing, and I closed my law practice and doing what I do now.
Wow. Yeah. Necessity is the mother of invention, right? As
Yeah,
they say.
exactly.
So it sounds like you really took a hold of those reins and ran with it. Well, that's fantastic. Tell us, what is this common? Is this a problem that obviously you see, but I mean, is this common for people to just, hey, I misplaced my inheritance? Like, talk to us about this. Like, why is this such an issue? How did this even come about, that your client had this problem?
So in the case of my partner and his wife, she'd been a nurse and it was a home health care agency she worked through it for, and the she had a patient that took a liking to her and said he wanted to give her a gift, and she said, well, I'm not allowed to accept gifts. That's part of the policy, and he said, okay, fine, and unbeknownst to her, he put her into his will, and meanwhile, that they had married and moved to another state. So when he passed away, it took a while for the attorney to find her. But there's money sitting out there all over the place. So we get calls from attorneys, from probate attorneys and trust administrators who call us, say they're handling a estate and they can't find the heirs, or sometimes they don't even know who the heirs are. They'll call us and say, the court appointed me to handle this estate. I don't know who the person was. I certainly didn't know his or her family. So can you find them for me?
Wow. Wow. So, I mean, this is like Magnum PI estate planning edition is, uh, what's the visualization going on in my head. But so this must happen enough that, attorneys are, they're worried about this. They're calling you. What happens on the other side? What happens if they don't find these people? What happens to this money? Does it sit in a holding trust? Does the state keep it in their, you know, um, jurisdiction? Tell me what happens if they don't connect?
So the law varies from state to state. In some states, they're supposed to turn over to the state what's called unclaimed property division, which is something we also deal with, which are assets that are sitting there for a certain period of time, whether it's a bank account or stock or insurance policy or something like that. And it gets turned over to the state, uh, including this type of money, but all other assets, all told, the states are sitting on about $100 billion of unclaimed property. And then in other states, the money goes to the county to hold. In some states, the executor is just supposed to hold on to it, but there's no public reporting, so there's no real transparency as to what happens to it. So it really varies from state to state. And in some states, if a certain period of time passes and the missing heirs don't show up, then the money can be distributed to the heirs who are known.
Gotcha, gotcha. So there's the holding, and obviously, wow, $100 billion. That's kind of average per state.
No, that's to the total.
Oh,
So
total. Okay,
there's a
okay.
it's a pretty strong correlation between the population of a state and how much unclaimed properties. So not surprisingly, New York, California, Texas, Florida are at the kind of the top of the list, and the bottom of the list are places like Wyoming and Montana.
Mississippi and yeah, yeah. Yeah, I get that. Okay, that makes more sense. But then they're sitting on that money and they're accruing the interest, and wow, there's all sorts of issues there I can see. I've never even thought about this. I've seen and I've used, website to find unclaimed property before. But it's been something like a rebate or, whatever kind of small things that I'm sure other people have experienced. But this is quite crazy that others may have, tens of thousands, millions of dollars out there that are just unclaimed. Um, so is tell us a little bit about your process then. Like, what do you do to, let's say an attorney calls you and says, "All right, Michael, this is where we're at." How do you go about trying to locate these individuals? What's your framework for trying to solve this problem?
Ancient Chinese secret. No, yeah. So there is no one path for finding missing heirs. It's definitely a combination of art and science and luck. Every case can be different because it's the starting point of where the heirs, who the heirs are, where they might be. Part of it depends on, are we looking for a specific heir who can't be found, or are we having to flesh out a whole family tree on someone whose whole family is unknown? So in the case where it's unknown, like I'll give you an example. We got a call. We recently settled the case for a woman who was living in Philadelphia and didn't have a will. Both of her daughters predeceased her by the time they died, she was already incapacitated and she couldn't do a will. Um, the court appointed an attorney to be her conservator and then the executor of her estate when she passed away. And this attorney called us, said, "Listen, I don't know anything about her. She didn't. She said she didn't really have family. I don't know who the heirs are. Can you find them?" So we were there. We were starting from just scratch. So we started by getting her. We needed to find out like who her parents were, so we could then branch out to find out who her aunts and uncles were, and then find out who her cousins were. So, we started by getting, for example, her death certificate and her birth certificate, because that had information, for example, like her parents' names and stuff like that. And then from there, there was more of a genealogy search that we had to do. But we have had other cases. We have one out of New Orleans where a man died, and again, did not have a will, and his widow knew that. I'm not sure when she found out, whether it was before or after he died, but knew that he had a child from a previous relationship some 40 years ago, but had no idea what the mother of that child's name was, nor the child's name. So there we were really starting from scratch. So we were able to find his divorce records in New Orleans, and then from there we were able to identify his first ex-wife, and then from there we were able to dig in some databases that we utilized, and we were able to find the name and whereabouts of the daughter, who is getting half the estate.
Yeah, so you're it's kind of all of the above. Do you ever use like DNA records or you have access to any of that? Have you had cases where that's been helpful?
That doesn't, I mean, I
Hmm.
could see where eventually that would become a case where we would need to check that. Sometimes we are asked just to do the due diligence to determine who the heirs are or to verify who heirs are. And we could see that coming the case. Usually, if someone presents themselves as an heir, like an uncle or a cousin or whatever, there should be documents that kind of will have a bouncing ball that will lead from that person to the deceased whose estate it is, birth certificates, death certificates, stuff like that. But we could easily see DNA coming into play, especially if someone claims that they're, the child of the deceased, and DNA could definitely play a role. We have not encountered that situation, but I could definitely see that coming someday.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm kind of into family history nerd, and go to conferences and things, and DNA has been just blowing up.
Yeah.
Um, but for different reasons, obviously, but kind of similar outcome of finding people, right? Obviously, dead people versus live people is a different story, but this is quite fascinating. I know we could probably geek out of like the some really specific details on how this might all work. But I want to ask one question, and then I kind of want to pivot to kind of business in general for you, like how, why this is so important for you and what success you've been having. But talk to us a little bit about what can be done to prevent even having to use, a service like yours.
Great question, because I actually do a seminar webinar on what 5 steps to avoid having to call me.
Mhm.
And one of them is to be very, specific in your, first of all, have a will, have an estate plan, which everybody should have in any case, but also the estate plan should identify who are the beneficiaries of the estate. And if there's any chance of there being some vagueness, recommend being very specific about who people are. We once had a case where someone left $20,000 and just said to my former foster son, and hasn't had his name, and this foster son had a relatively common name. We kind of just, I think there were 4 people in the county that had that same name. And basically, we just kind of narrowed it down. We went to the first one who, by his age, was probably the right guy. And then we went to him, and he when we said, were you with foster son of this person? He said, yeah. So then we were able, but then we had to dig up all these records to prove. Now, had he said, to John Smith, my foster son, whose date of birth is this, or who lived at this address, things would have been a whole lot easier. So, having giving that specificity can really help. We also do, I should have mentioned earlier, we also do a lot of asset searches where the heirs are known, but the assets are not. So excuse me, I'm a big proponent of having an asset inventory where, you list the assets that you have. It doesn't have to be the values, but someone who's going to be taking over your affairs after you leave this world should have that inventory of what the assets are. If you have a brokerage account, doesn't you don't need to list the amount or even the account number, just where what institutions have your assets. So this way, your your loved ones can find them later on, and they're not struggling. Frankly, when someone dies, the heirs already have enough on their plate emotionally and otherwise, and last thing they want to do is start searching all over the place to find the assets.
Yeah, great point. I mean, it works both ways, right? If you're searching for assets or searching for heirs, it just make it easier. I'm a big proponent on,
Mm.
just planning in
Yeah,
general, making sure
yeah,
that you have a will and a trust. I've told this story on the podcast before and in my books, but my father passed away at 49, very, very unexpected death, and there was no will. There was no trust set up. There were no instructions. Actually, I didn't even know how to get into his computer. My
yeah.
mom had
That's
no
that's one of the other
idea.
steps that's one of the steps I tell us. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, there's just there,
passwords.
but this was 20 years ago. 20
Hmm.
years ago. Like now we have password savers and, different things that can be helpful, but now we have like two, three, four-step, verification processes. Like
Yeah,
it's crazy. But then I spent, just a good part of a couple weeks with my mom after dad died, just trying to get into the assets. They were there, but I couldn't even touch them, and she couldn't get it. It was crazy.
yeah,
So yeah, so many of us are ill prepared for what we're not expecting, the unexpected, right?
right.
And we don't want to talk about it. We only talk about the cool things that are going to happen in life, and nobody wants to talk about this. But yet, really well planned out scenarios can really avoid a lot of this. So you were talking, obviously, great planning. You mentioned this next step of just really identifying who they are, these heirs are, and who or what assets, where these assets are located, that sort of thing. What's next? What's next on this webinar that you would normally be given? What would be the next step?
Well, I mean, so you touched on this, which is also make sure people can access your records, your email, get into your computer, get your emails, because nowadays a lot of people are getting a lot of their account statements online or via email. So this way people can see those and get into your accounts and notify whoever that what subscriptions need to be canceled or delivery services need to be canceled. Um, to take over things like just to take over things so that that the people on the other side of the transaction are not just sending emails that are going unanswered. And after a certain point, they'll just close the account or whatever, and then that could be a problem in of itself.
Yeah, so true. Very, very, very true. We all have nowadays, everything's on a subscription basis, right? We subscribe to just about everything, so that could absolutely be a problem. What other things would you suggest like people do that to make sure that they don't have to call you?
Those are kind of the big ones, like just making sure that your loved ones have the information about your assets, about how to get into your information, about who you want to inherit. You don't have to be specific about in the will what what assets you have. If you actually, I read a lot of wills in my work, and a lot of them don't have mentioned any assets whatsoever, but they will say they'll list the people. That's the important thing. And they'll say that everyone's just getting a percentage. I would say though that if you have, if you want to avoid fights when it comes to tangible items that have a sentimental value, whether they have any sort of financial value, is either, be very clear in your documents who's getting what, because
Mm,
that's where things can get nasty in between, people who ostensibly love each other and they're fighting over sometimes the stupidest things. Because there are items that cannot be divided. For example, grandma's engagement ring cannot be split up. I mean, it could be, but then it's not the same. Um, Grandma's engagement ring can't be split up. And then, so who's going to get it? You better be sure to be clear in your documents and don't just leave it up to, oh, they'll figure it out. That's a terrible approach. It's definitely the old adage of, failing to plan is planning to fail. Not having an estate plan is planning to fail in terms of, I mean, yes, families, some families get along great and everything goes fine. But everybody thinks their family's going to get along, and some don't. So just you know, and obviously, I would also say have that conversation though. Don't just put in the will and leave it for everyone to learn about after the fact. I think it's
mm,
best
hmm.
to sit down and say, hey, I've done my estate plan, and here's what I think is fair. So this way, everyone's hearing it from you, and if they want to
Yeah.
complain about it, they can complain about it to you, and they can get it out in the open. And this way, it's all out there, and nothing's left unsaid.
Yeah. Well said. I think the
Thank you.
family side of all of this is where all the complicated feelings and things happen. There's horror stories to tell. Every family has a horror story. I just think that we all can relate in some
Mhm.
way, form, or fashion, even if there's not much to divvy up. There are things that you know we're asked for probably in families, like, hey, mom or dad, if you pass, I'd like this, or grandma and grandpa, this would be really special, and that never end up with that person, because they don't have the conversation, they don't sit down and talk about it. Or I know this happens in a lot of families, Alzheimer's, right? And now how do you talk to that person? My grandpa dealt with Alzheimer's for almost 5 years before passing, and what the memory is gone, right? At least the short term. The long term is solid usually, but it's like, they're constantly reintroducing themselves. Didn't know that you were there, type of thing, as it gets progressively worse. I know a lot of families are dealing with that. So I'm definitely on the family side, and I love that you're talking about the communication. As you've read, as you said, lots and lots of wills. Maybe dive into that for just a moment. What does a really great will look like? And if we can just start there, let's just start with a will. How could a will be well crafted? You're an attorney. Obviously, you're not giving blanket statement advice to everyone out there, but in general, what should a good will look like?
Um, well, I should preface by saying, don't do it yourself. I know there is the temptation to you make a will with using ChatGPT, which is a great service, or one of these, estate plan in a box type of thing. I hate those. I've seen too many stories of people where the person decides to save some money by doing it himself or herself. And yeah, there's savings on the front end, but it can often lead to a lot of issues on the back end, whether it's there are ambiguities that you have to hire an attorney to clear them up. It might not be clear about things with who the heirs are, then they fight. There could be tax implications if there's enough money on the table. So it's definitely worth spending the little extra money to have an attorney do it right. I think just the key to a good estate plan is that it's clear. It is clear that who is getting what. Yeah, I was explaining to a friend of mine recently who asked me she has a successful business. Her husband's a professional. They have kids ranging in age from toddler to late teens. And I said legal documents should are things that you do, but you don't want to look at them, but you have to make sure that they're done right. And they're supposed to envision the worst case scenario of what happens in the worst case scenario, including fighting. You want to head those things off, and you just want the documents just be clear about what happens and who gets what. And there's like it can be a simple will. I've seen some 1 or 2 page wills that cover all the bases very easily, and then the other wills that get very, very specific. So, like I said, going back to if you have a lot of tangible items that are of sentimental value, and people really want those. A a good will really address those on a granular level. So it's about having clarity.
I love that. Where would you suggest people get started? I mean, how do they find a good estate planning attorney? I know a lot of attorneys can draft a will, but just like you said, I mean, you can get templates, you can get Chat GPT, and a basic, a general attorney could probably draft a will, but that's not someone who has a specialty who really knows what they're doing. What would you suggest? You've been in this business for a long time. How would they go about finding the right person to draft a will or trust and help them with their estate planning?
Well, the day and age of general practitioners is over. There are very few left there. There are a few, I'm sure, in the smaller towns where they're one of the few attorneys left in town that do it. But I can't think of any attorneys I know that are general practitioners. They usually have 1 or 2 specialties. So you definitely want someone who specializes in that field, in that area of law. Nowadays, fortunately, with Zoom and remote signing and notaries that can come meet you wherever you are, you don't necessarily have to have someone in your hometown. Someone's as long as they're licensed in your state should be good. If you have a professional that can refer someone that they already know, whether most accountants know state planning attorneys because they often have to work hand in hand on stuff, or financial advisors all know probated estate planning attorneys. Um, Ask a professional who knows, and they all do. I happen to know a lot of them across the country, so people can feel free to reach out to me, and I can make a referral if they want. And but definitely go with someone who, like I said, specializes in that and comes with referrals from people who have firsthand experience with that attorney.
Wonderful. Appreciate your advice today. It's been a fantastic conversation. Um, I've been in financial planning industry for years and years and years, and never have I ever crossed someone who has such a specialty as you. But if they didn't do great planning, meaning the ones who had the assets, they don't know the heirs, and you're missing where the assets are located, or any of these things. They didn't have a great will, and there's all sorts of family problems involved in this, and they need to reach out to you. Obviously, you get a lot of referrals from estate planning attorneys, as you mentioned, but if somebody wants to reach out to you directly and ask you for services, what's the best place they can reach you at? Is it email? Is it phone? Is it website? Why don't you let us know how
Best place
listeners
to
can
reach
find you?
me, sorry, best way to reach me, I'd say email, which is mzwick@assetsinternational.com. So it's my first initial last name at companyname.com. Or I'm very active on LinkedIn, and I must have been the first Michael Zwick to get on there many years ago because I believe I'm linkedin.com/Michael Zwick. But
Perfect.
I'm easy to find. I'm pretty active there. Um, I'm usually posting at least once a week, sometimes 5 days a week. It just depends. So
Wow.
I'm pretty active on there. So I mean, easy to find, and I'm regularly checking my inbox on there as well.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. If there's anything else you'd like to drop to listeners today that would be helpful to them, to other individuals in the financial planning industry, what would be that one piece of advice?
Just be prepared. Prepare yourself because an estate plan is an act of love. It's something that you're leaving behind for your loved ones after you leave this world. And you don't want to leave you don't want to leave them a lump of coal. Leave them a good plan, do the right thing for them, and you don't want them cursing you after after you're gone.
That's right. I love that. Yes, be prepared. It's interesting because I spent years and years as a financial advisor and saw so many families struggle, fight, miscommunicate about money. And this is a big one. This is a big one. I see it at all levels. It doesn't matter the amount of money one makes or not. There's always some type of stress. And it's
Yeah.
well, actually one of the reasons why I wrote my book, Marry and Grow Rich. If you haven't picked up a copy of this, you can get it at marryandgrowrichbook.com. Again, if you want to hit up Michael, please reach out to him. It sounds like he's a treasure trove of knowledge around this context, and definitely be prepared and be ready for the transition. In fact, we're in the generation, right? The greatest asset transfer in history is happening right before our eyes. So, Michael, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you again for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And again, remember, live life on purpose together. Until next time, we'll see you then.